Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America and the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program today. As mentioned, our special guest is Don Oscar Miro-Quesada. He originated the Pachakuti Mesa tradition of cross-cultural shamanism, is the visionary founder of the Heart of the Healer Foundation. He's been a popular faculty member at numerous U.S. colleges and universities. His works and programs have been featured on CNN, Univision, A&E, and the Discovery Channel. Don Oscar, great to have you with us. Welcome to This Week in America.
Thank you so much, Rick. Aim punchao to all of your listening audience. That means good day in Quechua, the language of my Andean ancestors. Thanks for having me on board.
It's a pleasure. And co-author of the book Lessons in Courage, Peruvian Shamanic Wisdom for Everyday Life. We'll be talking about that in detail on the program today. I'd like to first of all start I'm fascinated with where all you've been in your life. And it all started, you were born in Peru. First of all, you say in the book, intellectual parents. How beneficial was that to you at an early age, that you had parents that were intellectual and probably challenged you along the way?
They did challenge me, and not in a conscious manner, but just they were big shoes to fill. My family in Peru are respected journalists and intellectuals, writers, scholars. And I was a very poor student in my early days. I discovered the love of learning when I was already a young adult in college. So, yet after a while, I realized that a donkey with a load of books is still a donkey. So in a way, the intellectual or rational approach to discovering truth eventually fell short, and that's why I opened up so passionately to more soul-infused living, such as the shamanic arts and other types of spiritual paths. So yes, I was born and raised in Peru, Peruvian father, American mother, and from a very, very early age was exposed to the majesty of the natural world. My father worked for the National Institutes of Public Health, so he was stationed in very remote rural areas of Peru, where I had a chance to really be raised by indigenous communities and get to know the life way of these earth-centered peoples. So when I returned after my early formative years back to the capital city of Lima, I felt very out of place. And there's where I was exposed to all this intellectual, quotes, unquotes, dominant
Right.
ways of thinking, yes.
You talk at age 10. You had a chronic illness as a child, and at age 10, there was a miraculous healing, and this sort of opened your eyes even at an early age. Talk a little bit about what happened and your experience with that.
Certainly. In the book Lessons in Courage, Peruvian Shamanic Wisdom for Everyday Life that you mentioned, I co-authored with Bonnie Glass Coffin. She's the world's most renowned anthropologist when it comes to specializing in female healers, folk healers of Peru. And the reason I'm saying this is because it's very difficult to encapsulate this experience in the short period of time we have in this interview, but in the book it's detailed in a way that I feel will provide a sense of truth to the reader, because the events are quite incredulous, Rick. This was my second near-death experience. I had had a near-death experience at age 1.5. I was electrocuted, as a matter of fact. Yet at 10 years old, because of all of my early childhood suffering from severe asthma, I was taken to the highland town of Chosica in central Andean area of Peru, and to get away from the humidity of the coastal city of Lima and the smog. It was the only place I could breathe without having to have IV cortisone or dexamethasone. And yet, even at that altitude, I was suffering from these asthmatic attacks. And in one of those, the most severe case of hypoxia or constrictive breathing that I could recall, I started to slip out of this world and felt like I was basically vaporizing, becoming this particle field, and started to float out, the typical classical tunnel of light, and experiencing extraordinary liberating bliss and relief, to be away from the pain of the body. And all of a sudden I hear my name being called in the background, my nickname at that time that my father had given me. And I was being called to come back. So I popped into my body, and lo and behold, in front of me was this very tall, about 7-foot, shimmering, luminous being. And to my left, another, and to my right, another. And I call these the shining ones. They were these visitors from behind the curtain, from behind the veil, from the crack between the worlds, if I could describe them. And this is not about needing to explain how these beings appear in the life of certain individuals, and maybe everybody after we do leave this earth, because that would be reductionistic. I prefer to just allow the listener to understand that these events are my truth, and I'm not asking anybody to buy into them. I'm just telling my story. So the one on my left bent over and placed his lips to my chest. You have to imagine these are long, white, bearded, white-haired,
Right.
scintillating white robes, classic angelic beings, penetrating blue eyes, an extraordinary, compassionate field of love. So I felt very safe. No fear at all. This being to my left bent over, placed his lips to my chest, and began a classic shamanic suction and extraction, and just sucked all of the disease out of my being, and then offered it to the heavens, which I saw it just spiral out. Then the one to my right placed both of his hands above my chest and began to concentrate and infuse me, do some sort of transmission where I felt my body becoming reintegrated, restored into full health. And I'm cutting this story short, of course. And the one that was at the foot of my bed, which seemed to be the elder of the three, began to communicate telepathically with me, images, visions, scenarios, vistas, everything from what had happened to me before that moment and what would happen to me, the events in my life that I would encounter from age 10 onward, the schools I'd go to, the relationships I'd have, the marriages, the most pivotal challenges that I would have to confront. And after a while, they suggested that I just close my eyes and go into a slumber, and I did. And I became totally amnesic of that experience until I had my first shamanic healing session with my primary mentor, Don Celso Rojas Palomino, that is also highlighted in the book. And on that evening, I was 18 years old, out of the center of this very famed folk healer's ceremonial altar ground. The same three wizened old shining ones emerged. And Don Celso elbows me and he says, "Do you remember them?" And you can imagine, Rick, at that time, my life
Certainly
turned upside down, because here's another person that was witnessing the same visitors from these other realms.
amazing.
That was the beginning of my incursion fully into the shamanic landscape of my ancestral peoples of Peru.
You're listening to This Week in America and the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Our guest on the program today is Don Oscar Miro-Quesada. His book is Lessons in Courage, Peruvian Shamanic Wisdom for Everyday Life. His website is heartofthehealer.org. Of course, you can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link up and get more information. That is all detailed in the book, Lessons of Courage, co-written, as you mentioned, with Bonnie Glass Coffin. There's so many things that are interesting in the book to talk about. And the key to the book is really transformation. And as I'm reading that, it takes you to a peaceful state. And let's talk about transformation. What exactly does that mean? And how do we, average people going about a hectic schedule every day, and you go through the same thing of the conflicts of life like everyone else, how do we achieve that transformation?
Well, all I can speak of is my personal experience, Rick. And what works for me, and which I've shared with my students over 3 decades now, is first of all, accept that the only permanent thing in life is change, that everything is transformation, that we are in a process of constant renewal, both physically and spiritually, if you subscribe to that type of reality. Hence, by beginning to understand that everything changes, everything transforms, takes on different expressions, you open up to a flow, to a life that is much more of a current than a linear step-by-step process. At that point, at least I, start to feel more intuitive and more tuned into what's outside of my own self-absorbed reality, and open up to the magic, to the mystery, to the great originating mystery, and to the wonderful teachings that are in the natural world, as well as in the foibles and mistakes of our wonderful human nature. And as maintaining that awareness, that open receptivity, that embrace of the unpredictable is transformation. It's a crossing over. It's a remaining open to life's lessons.
You talk in the book Lessons in Courage, Peruvian Shamanic Wisdom for Everyday Life. Our guest on the program today is Don Oscar Miro-Quesada. The book is available all across the country. His website, heartofthehealer.org. You talk about it's a long journey, basically from your head to your heart. And I like that. Do we see too many things through the filter of our head rather than our heart, and not trusting our intuition? Is that a problem?
Once again, my experience would be, I'd answer yes. There's an over-reliance on the intellect.
Right.
And there's a big difference, in my opinion, between intelligence and intellect. Intelligence is common sense. Intellect is factual knowledge and accumulation of data. And that is the mistake that we're making, in my opinion, in the modern industrialized or technologically motivated culture that we're part of. We are more interested in data than we are in experience, in intelligence, in being able to relate and communicate with each other, instead of just transfer bits of information. So, yes, how could I put it? In terms of the path from the head to the heart, that 17 inches. In native cultures, we understand that that is the longest road we'll ever travel. Because instead of trying to interpret, control, and seek approval from the outside world, when you go to the heart, you relax into the world. And you open up to loving the world with all of its problems. And instead of judging something, you don't create separation. You allow yourself to receive the inherent wholeness that is your birthright. So, in my opinion, the return journey from a place of feeling, from a place of open, intuitive, loving awareness of all that is, we must make the return journey to the head. Because only then, when we use our words, when we create our images, our thoughts, and we give them action in the world, will that be good medicine, as they say in indigenous cultures. Because when you speak from the heart, and allow the mind to be your servant rather than your master, it becomes of value to another. If not, it'll just be more information empty of a living soul.
Interesting. So this really is a two-way street.
It is a two-way, everything is. Everything is, right? You got to keep it in balance. The shamanic arts keep you in balance. It's all about equilibrium.
The book is called Lessons in Courage, Peruvian Shamanic Wisdom for Everyday Life. Our guest on the program, Don Oscar Miro-Quesada, co-authored the book with Bonnie Glass-Coffin. The website is heartofthehealer.org. A couple minutes left in the program. I want to go back to something that I found fascinating in the book because there's so many things you can take away from the book that will impact your life. This goes back to the lessons of the cane field. I think you're like 18 years old, and you said part of the teachings there was be open to the teachings of the moment. We all need to do that. And let go of the need to be perfect. All of us strive every day. We need to complete this task, and we need to make it perfect. First of all, what kind of impact did those lessons have on your life? And as you're teaching now with the students you have there, because that's obviously where the future is going to be, how receptive are they to these ideas?
Well, those listeners that are interested in how receptive they are can visit www.heartofthehealer.org, where you'll see testimonials from many, if not all, of the apprentices of the Pachakuti Mesa cross-cultural shamanic tradition. Yet the sugarcane field experience was paramount in many ways. Yet the greatest lesson that I received from Don Celso is knowing that to harvest a cane when it's still, the tips of it is a little green, where it still is flexible and yields to the wind and doesn't snap. So when you harvest it, it still has its sweetness, its nectar, its living spirit in it. And by keeping it green is also a metaphor used in recovery in 12-step programs. It means never become an expert. Never think that you are going to be perfect at something, as you well said. And at that point, you always remain a humble, receiving student of life's majesty, of life's incredible wealth of directive and of guidance. And so keeping the cane green, staying green, offering something that is green to another makes a lot of sense in today's world where we've estranged ourselves from the sacred dimensions of life, especially the living earth, which is our green planet.
Out of time on the program, our thanks to our guest, Don Oscar Miro-Quesada, author of the book Lessons in Courage, Peruvian Shamanic Wisdom for Everyday Life, written along with Bonnie Glass-Coffin. His website is heartofthehealer.org, and, of course, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the program. Don Oscar, thank you. You're listening to This Week in America and the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network.
You've been listening to This Week in America with Rick Bratton. And join us next time for another broadcast of This Week in America.